Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
She was 21 when she started working at the pizzeria near campus. She did it to pay for her textbooks and help with the household bills. Her dad had walked out 2 years earlier after a fight that split the family in half. Her mom was never the same again, and Lauren understood early on that if she wanted a different future, she'd have to build it herself. Garrett worked at the same place, handling the grill and delivery orders. He was quiet, focused, and always on time. He had a simple way of dealing with everything, including her. While other coworkers tried to impress her with jokes and silly chatter, Garrett just did his job and offered help whenever he could. Sometimes he'd carry the sauce boxes without her even asking. Other times he'd switch shifts when she needed to go to the library. And it was those small, almost silent kindnesses that stirred something in her. They started talking during restaurant closings. As they wiped down counters and checked the cash register, they'd talk about books, movies, their families, dreams, and frustrations. Over time, Lauren began to realize that Garrett offered something rare: stability. He seemed grounded, and he gave her the feeling that the world could actually be safer than she'd ever known it to be. Garrett was the son of an electrician and an elementary school teacher. He'd been working since he was 15 and was studying business administration at night. He said he didn't want luxury, just a decent life, a modest house, bills paid on time, and someone to share Sundays with. He spoke about these things plainly, without exaggeration, and that touched Lauren, who was still surrounded by the trauma of a broken home. Their relationship began quietly. An invitation for coffee after work. A Saturday afternoon movie. Kisses exchanged between shifts. Within a few months, they were together every day. Garrett walked Lauren to the library, waited for her between classes, and helped her review for exams. When she got accepted into a master's program in literature, he celebrated more than anyone else. He told her he was proud and that he'd do whatever it took to help her follow that path. And he kept that promise. Even with the new academic demands, they stayed together. Lauren kept falling for Garrett's simple ways: how he treated his parents, managed his finances, and paid attention to the little things in daily life. When he proposed marriage on an ordinary day, with no ring or elaborate speech, she said yes because she was certain that with him by her side, she'd be protected from all the uncertainty life might bring. The wedding was intimate, with just a few friends and family members. They bought a used car and rented a small apartment. They stuck to their routines, supporting each other, sharing chores, and building a life together, brick by brick. While Garrett gained stability at an insurance company, Lauren dove into her studies, teaching prep courses and writing academic papers late into the night. During her second year of the master's program, she started attending reading groups and specialized seminars. That's when she met Julian, a visiting professor who led a research group on modern narrative. Julian was cultured, articulate, and full of philosophical references. Unlike Garrett, who often yawned when she talked about Dostoevsky or Woolf, Julian listened intently. He told her she had a rare sensitivity, that her writing revealed unusual emotional maturity, compliments Garrett never knew how to give with such intensity. Lauren began to feel a quiet frustration. She knew Garrett loved her, but sometimes it seemed they were on different wavelengths. While she wanted to discuss postmodern literature, he'd ask if the car needed an oil change. It was as if their bond was still strong but resting on different foundations. Garrett represented safe, reliable love. Julian, on the other hand, awakened something in her she thought she'd buried: the desire to be truly understood at her core. For weeks, she convinced herself this admiration was purely professional. She told herself Julian was just someone she shared ideas with. Until the day after an academic presentation, when they stayed late organizing papers. Julian praised her talk, her writing, her perspective on the topics discussed. When he leaned in, she didn't pull away. And when they kissed, she closed her eyes and let herself forget everything she'd built with Garrett. The affair with Julian didn't last long. It was a series of sporadic meetings filled with guilt and silence. Lauren knew she'd crossed a line she could never uncross. And that's what made her end it. She cut off contact, avoided the research group, and threw herself back into her relationship with Garrett with renewed effort, as if she could erase her mistake through sheer determination. Not long after, she found out she was pregnant. Garrett cried when he heard the news. He said it was the happiest day of his life. Lauren, caught in a whirlwind of emotions, decided she'd never reveal what had happened. She was sure the baby was his. And even if it wasn't, she told herself that one slip-up didn't matter compared to everything they'd built together. The pregnancy went smoothly. Vanessa was born healthy, and Garrett proved to be a devoted father from day one. He woke up in the middle of the night to care for the baby, learned how to prepare bottles, changed diapers without complaint. Through small actions, he showed a love that grew over time. Watching all this, Lauren became more and more convinced she'd made the right choice. She tried to bury the past with every smile from Garrett, every tender moment between him and their daughter. But even buried, the truth remained, silent, and waiting. Vanessa had just turned 15 when she brought up DNA tests during a regular lunch. A trend had gone viral on social media, with families discovering unexpected origins, surprising ethnic mixes, and emotional reunions with distant relatives. She laughed, showing them her phone, excited by the idea of doing something similar. She thought it would be interesting to find out if she had Irish, Italian, or indigenous ancestry. She wanted to know where her features, habits, and physical quirks came from. Garrett thought it sounded fun. He'd always been curious, enjoyed solving puzzles, and liked understanding how things worked. He smiled, agreed, and even went ahead and ordered the kits. Lauren kept her composure, but something tightened deep in her chest. She pretended it was no big deal, nodded along, and said it would be interesting. She was curious about her own origins too. Her voice sounded steady, but inside, her stomach churned. The kits arrived within days. They filled out the forms together, laughed while trying to collect samples with the swabs, sealed the envelopes, and dropped them in the mail. The topic faded. Lauren tried to think about other things, work, books, classes, as she always did when she needed to hide a truth knocking at the door. The memory of what happened with Julian felt distant, almost irrelevant. It had been just once, over a decade ago. Vanessa had been raised with love, care, and stability. Nothing could erase that. 2 weeks later, the results arrived by email. Lauren was in the middle of reviewing a manuscript when she heard Vanessa shout from her room, "They're here." Her daughter came downstairs with her phone in hand, excited, and Garrett followed close behind. They sat together, ready to laugh at whatever they'd find. Lauren held her laptop on her lap, hands trembling. Her heart raced, as if it already knew what was coming. She opened the email and clicked the link. The page took a moment to load. When the results appeared, the air felt heavier. Garrett looked over the report with his usual calm. He studied the percentages, the charts, the comparative data. Vanessa laughed at an unexpected percentage of Spanish ancestry. But he fell silent. His eyes went to the bottom of the report, where the genetic match index was listed. His name appeared under "no direct biological relation." He stared at the document for a long time, then looked at Lauren. She looked away. Vanessa, still distracted by the charts, didn't notice the shift in mood. Garrett handed her the phone, pointed to the result, and said quietly, "Look at this." His daughter read it, not understanding at first. She read it again. Then she looked up at them both. "What does this mean?" Garrett stood up, grabbed his keys, and walked out. No more words. No accusations. Lauren sat frozen, her legs tingling. Vanessa, meanwhile, went into shock. She shut herself in her room and cried alone. Lauren tried to reach out, but her daughter refused any explanation for now. All Lauren could think was how this had slipped out of her control. One mistake made in a moment of doubt had traveled through decades to destroy everything she valued most, the family she'd built, the husband she respected, the daughter she loved. When Garrett came back to collect his things, he avoided any long conversation. He gathered clothes, documents, and a book he'd been reading. Lauren tried to talk to him. She said it had happened before she knew she was pregnant. She tried to explain it was a moment of confusion and insecurity, that she never would have moved forward if she'd known the consequences. Garrett listened in silence. Before leaving, he said only, "For 16 years, I was her father because I believed I was. And I was a good father. But you knew. You always knew." He filed for divorce 3 days later. He didn't ask for custody or make financial demands. He simply submitted the paperwork and moved on, as if closing a book he never intended to open again. Lauren read the papers with cold hands. Every line felt like a hammer striking her soul. The end didn't come with shouting or fights. It came with absence, the abrupt severing of everything they'd built over 18 years together. Vanessa started seeing a therapist on her own initiative. She wanted to understand who she was. She wondered if all the love she'd received had been a lie. Lauren tried talking to her every day, but her daughter avoided deep topics. She preferred silence. Sometimes they'd eat dinner together without exchanging more than 3 sentences. Other times, Vanessa would leave and sleep at a friend's house. Their bond hung by a thread, and Lauren felt that any wrong move might snap it for good. Even without contact, Lauren still discreetly checked social media for any updates on Garrett. She found out he'd changed jobs and started teaching at a local university. He seemed fine, at least in photos. Meanwhile, she kept up appearances in literary circles. She had to honor commitments, contracts, and reader expectations. But everything felt harder now, as if the air had changed, as if every word she wrote weighed too much. At times, she thought about Julian. About how one reckless choice had sent everything tumbling downhill. And yet, she never reached out to him. She never tried to shift the blame. Because deep down, she knew the decision had been hers. And now, she was paying the price, a price that wasn't just the end of her marriage, but the fragility of her daughter's love, who'd grown up unaware of the truth and might never look at her the same way again. Right after the divorce, Garrett spent weeks gathering documents, old messages, and anything that could prove he'd been deceived for years. Separating wasn't enough for him, he felt a line had been crossed, and someone had to pay for it. For 16 years, he'd financially supported his daughter, invested in her future, covered health insurance, school, trips, and courses, all while believing he was her biological father. To Garrett, this wasn't some distant mistake. It was a prolonged deception that had corroded everything he believed a family should be. He hired a law firm specializing in complex family litigation. He didn't just want to annul the marriage on paper, he wanted financial restitution for what he considered emotional and financial fraud. The lawyer studied the case, reviewed Lauren's history, gathered evidence of the affair, and built a strong civil lawsuit. The demand wasn't small: full reimbursement for all expenses related to Vanessa since birth, plus moral damages for deliberately concealing paternity. The amount stunned even Lauren when she received the notice, close to $500,000, plus interest and legal fees. To make matters worse, Garrett didn't stop at the courtroom. He used professional contacts he'd built over the years to target her career. He sent carefully worded emails to editors, agents, and literary event organizers, revealing in detail the betrayal, the DNA test, and the emotional scam. He wrote coldly and methodically, including dates, attachments, and screenshots. This wasn't gossip, it was a meticulously assembled dossier. His goal was to undermine Lauren's public image as an author who wrote about love, fidelity, and family values. Within months, she stopped receiving speaking invitations, lost publishing contracts, and had events cancelled under the guise of image reassessment. Julian, who at the time was just an assistant professor with a rising career, also came under fire. Garrett hired a private investigator to collect evidence of the brief affair between him and Lauren. He gathered exchanged emails, phone records, and receipts from meetings paid for with her credit card around the time of her master's program. Garrett sent this material to Julian's university, suggesting unethical conduct with students, grade favoritism, and misuse of academic resources for personal gain. The impact was immediate. Julian was suspended for internal investigation, and unable to defend himself publicly, watched his reputation collapse. He lost his position, faced disciplinary proceedings, had conference invitations revoked, and his name became synonymous with scandal in academic circles. Lauren watched it all unfold almost like a movie. First came the lawsuit, aggressive lawyers, harsh questions, a compensation claim that could wipe out all her savings. Then, the implosion of her career. Publishers canceled contracts, literary blogs posted scathing reviews, last-minute interview cancellations. Emails that used to be invitations turned into breach notices. Her book started receiving malicious reviews laced with insinuations about her personal life. The literary world she'd built through hard work and discipline had become a silent battlefield. Vanessa, caught in the middle, became an unwilling witness. She was called to give statements in the case, forced to relive every detail. She saw her father transform into a methodical, calculating man driven by a deep need for justice, or revenge. And she watched her mother emotionally unravel, trying to hold on to dignity while everything crumbled around her. For Lauren, each court hearing was a reminder that one misstep had turned into a hurricane. For Garrett, each hearing was a step toward what he believed was reparation for years of lies. Lauren tried to defend herself. She hired lawyers, sent letters explaining that the affair with Julian had happened before she knew she was pregnant, that there'd been no intent to deceive. But the court didn't judge intentions, it judged facts. And the facts were against her. Garrett had built a solid narrative, and the legal system accepted his arguments about financial and psychological harm. Local newspapers began covering the case with sensational headlines: insurance executive sues ex-wife, the novelist, over paternity fraud. Gossip sites picked up the story. Her privacy vanished. Julian, meanwhile, reached out to her in desperation. He said he was ruined, that this was bigger than anything they'd ever experienced. He begged her to publicly defend him. Lauren refused. She felt guilty, but also resentful. After all, he'd moved on, built a career, while she'd carried the weight of the secret alone. Now they were both in the same boat, but for very different reasons. This legal battle and smear campaign marked a dramatic turning point. Garrett, once a quiet, reserved man, became someone willing to use every legal and social tool to expose what he believed was the truth. Lauren, who'd always prided herself on being strong and independent, found herself cornered, drowning in debt, broken contracts, and a reputation dragged through the mud. Julian, once a promising intellectual, became an academic outcast. None of this happened overnight. It was a steady, planned erosion, almost silent, yet devastating. By the time Lauren realized the full extent of the damage, she was already surrounded. Her professional life had stalled, her assets were frozen by court order, and her reputation was destroyed on two fronts, in court and in public opinion. Garrett never raised his voice, but he'd assembled an arsenal of evidence and actions that hit exactly where it hurt most. While awaiting the court's final decision, Lauren lived in a constant state of alert, trying to figure out how far Garrett would go to undo everything they'd built together. And inside her, something new began to grow, a mix of pain, indignation, and a desire to start over, even when it seemed there was no ground left to stand on. Lauren didn't make it to the end of the trial. During one of the final hearings, as she listened to Garrett's attorney meticulously describe the years he'd been deceived, she broke down. The accumulated emotional pressure, her daughter's silent disdain from just a few feet away, the judgmental stares in the courtroom, and the weight of everything she'd lost created an internal storm she couldn't control. She collapsed, was rushed out of the room, and never returned to court. Her lawyer finished the defense without her, but by then it was clear, Lauren had been defeated, not just in court, but in every area of life she'd once occupied with pride. The verdict came weeks later. She'd have to pay Garrett partial compensation, a smaller amount than requested, but still high enough to jeopardize her future. Her assets were seized, her bank account frozen, and the few remaining opportunities in publishing vanished after the ruling became public. Lauren then made the only decision still within her power: she left. She quietly moved out of town, rented a small apartment in another state, and started working under a different name as a freelance editor. It was a dull, unglamorous fresh start, but it was all she had left. Garrett, for his part, completely shut the door on any attempt at reconciliation with Vanessa. He never replied to her messages and didn't attend her high school graduation. He moved to a smaller town and began teaching at a local college. He threw himself into his career with the same precision he'd used to dismantle the past. When asked about family, he simply said he was divorced and had no children. He turned his pain into routine, and his routine into armor. He preferred to live as if none of it had ever happened, as if Lauren and Vanessa were just characters in a story he'd closed and tucked away in a drawer. Julian's life also turned upside down. After being fired from the university and subjected to internal investigations, his wife found out everything and filed for divorce. He lost his reputation, invitations, marriage, and whatever fragile balance he'd been clinging to. He tried rebuilding his career elsewhere, but his name was too tarnished. He moved to another country, starting over at a small university in South America, accepting a position far beneath his former rank. He settled into a quiet life, far from the intellectual prestige he'd once cherished, and completely alone. Vanessa forged her own path. Exhausted by her parents' pain, legal battles, and forced silences, she went to college in another state and sought intensive therapy to deal with her fractured sense of identity. Her mother tried reaching out a few times with short, longing messages, but Vanessa still needed space. Their relationship remained suspended, like a wound that had stopped bleeding but still throbbed. And so, each of them moved forward, marked by a truth that had cost far too much to reveal. The love that once existed was now buried beneath documents, promises, and court rulings. And no one walked away unscathed. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.